All right, so I want to welcome everyone to this February's Ask Me Anything, from education to employment and advancement. I am Heather Harrington. I am the ASCLS Ascending Professional Forum Vice Chair, and I want to welcome our three fantastic panelists this evening. So we have Miles Tompkins. He worked as a hiring and training manager for over 15 years for some of America's best known brands, and then went to Rose State College for medical laboratory technology and worked as a medical technologist for Diagnostic Laboratory of Oklahoma at Integris Baptist Medical Center in Oklahoma City for 9 years before being promoted to the role of medical technology recruitment and retention specialist. Thank you for joining us. We also have Ian Wallace. He is a medical laboratory scientist, laboratory supervisor, SCL Health Hematology Best Practice Team Lead at Platte Valley Medical Center, and ASCLS Colorado past president. He has worked in the field on nearly every type of shift for 10 plus years. And we also have Shawn Wierzbowski. He is the founder and CEO of Intro, an MLS recruitment firm located on the East Coast near Washington, D.C. He works with laboratories and medical laboratory scientists to help connect them with one another. I very much appreciate the three of them coming tonight. If we have any questions, please ask them in the chat. I will be keeping an eye on that, and hopefully so will Andrea. If we don't have any yet, I had the panelists maybe preload some questions. So if we don't have any just yet, we'll start out with Miles. And how do we even prepare for an interview?
Well, the main thing I can tell people is practice, practice, practice. You know, any more than you would any other activity, any other skill. I would take the time, come up with some mock interview questions and practice with your friends, practice with your colleagues. The other thing I would tell people is not just to look at the questions at face value, look into why they're asking those questions. An example I can give is you always hear, and to be frank with it, I hate these questions, but they ask, what's your greatest strength? What's your greatest weakness? And you sit there and go, but to be honest, what they're really looking for here is what area in that job can they start you at right away? Or what part of that are they going to be able to put you right in and not have a problem, versus what part of the job is going to need the most training, going to need the most development, going to need the most time to get you to the level they need you at. And so when they're asking those questions, understand that they're coming from that place. Same thing when they ask you, tell me about yourself. You know, they're not necessarily going to put all the emphasis on, you know, where you're from or what school you went to. What they're looking into is, how is this interview going to go? Is it going to be pulling teeth to get you to talk to us? Or is it going to be, you know, a conversation that we can have? And so when we're asking those questions, they're coming from a specific place, and it's part of your responsibility as the interviewee to know where those places are coming from, to know the meaning behind the questions. And that'll make it a lot easier for you in the long run.
I'm curious about, even before maybe getting the interview, what are good things do you think people should put on a resume? Either if they're brand new to the field, or if they've been in it for a little while and might be looking to switch things around. I know Ian has been in the field on doing a lot of things for a long time. I'm curious what you would think about that.
So when I first started, I literally documented, and you'll hear that word a lot from me based probably on some of my answers. I documented all the analyzers that I had worked on, what kind of tests that were run. So when I did sit for my first interview, I was able to discuss specifically what I had. And it was a benefit to my employer at the time, because lo and behold, they had the same analyzers. So it wasn't just starting someone as green as can be. It was someone that at least had some familiarity with the analyzer and the test being performed. Furthermore, it never hurts to discuss or have proof of anything you did while you were training. Let's say a validation was going on. Definitely put that as something that you experienced first starting off. Anything that's kind of out of the norm, if it's specialty testing, because you never know, your employer might be trying to bring something online shortly, and it could be of huge value to just understand the experience you've had at a separate facility.
I see we have a question in the chat about laboratory professionals asking for a raise if they've taken on a lot more in their normal job, but maybe haven't actually changed official roles.
I wouldn't mind starting with that answer. So again, documenting. If you are stepping up and doing things that you have done independently, if you have volunteered to take on projects and you have documented proof, when you go to your employer and you start discussing that, you have it in your hand to say, this is what I did, and it, helped out the lab and was a benefit. Same thing. I've always been involved in performance evaluations for how our raises are done. So if you've been evaluated by your peers or received recognition from anywhere else outside the facility or even internally, to have that piece of paper or that printout email that just says you've been recognized really does a lot of, it strengthens your case when you do go and ask for a raise.
I would love to hear, especially with this being about money, from our other two panelists as well, because I know it's a topic that we all want more of.
Yeah, I'll add. Yeah, Ian, that was some good points. But one of the things when the pandemic started was people couldn't get raises because of internal equity. And lately, this past year, if a key player in the lab puts in a resignation, they're quick to, in the right situation, make you a better offer. But it goes back to just documenting what extra stuff you're doing, because if they can add that to the job duties, it can justify higher pay.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to add to that is to do your research maybe outside as well. It doesn't hurt to look up what other jobs are offering. It doesn't hurt to look up the national labor statistics to see, if, for example, if you were hired on as an MLT and you're doing more MLS, within the law, of course, but doing more MLS job functions, then I would be looking up what are the job functions in your area paying? What are those professions paying? And keeping up with what the averages are for your area and the nation in your particular department as well. Keep in mind, a lot of places are now paying premium pay for specific departments that are considered higher complexity, higher stress than what is just defined by CLIA. So that is something to take into consideration as well when you're looking to determine what your value is.
I'm curious, I know, Shawn, I've not heard of a company like yours before. And I'm curious, for people who, want to go straight into a lab, that's definitely a possibility. But I'm wondering if you have kind of other advancement options maybe that you've thought of.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I've learned is that the ladder is not straight up. It can go in a ton of different directions. And, while, we want CLSs to stay in the lab, I like to give people as many options as possible. And I found that, advancement can come into the form of, one thing people don't look into is doing laboratory accreditation. That's another route people could go to get the quality assurance experience. A lot of working for CROs, like clinical research organizations, you can work as quality control analyst. That's another path. And then moving into instrumentation, being a field specialist, or even lab IT. There's a lot of different routes to go.
Yeah, those are options I would never even consider. I just sort of went straight to the bench and that was it. Samantha had another question about the increase of travel MLS and MLT contracts, and if they've changed the landscape of hiring, and maybe if there's a way for us to use that to our advantage.
I can answer part of that first. Is it's changed the landscape quite a bit. One of the things that I can tell you from an organization that does not use travel, but we've hired on a lot of people that were originally traveling, is travel does tend to pay more on the net pay. Where you lose out on travel is sometimes the benefits and some of those options that you have that you would normally have with either a larger reference lab or a hospital lab. You know, paid time off, 401k, those items, but they do start higher salary. One of the ways that we have taken that to our advantage is recognizing that, well, the higher salary, you know, versus the benefits, doing the math in that. And that's something that you can do on your own and look and say, hey, the amount that you would be spending for me in benefits versus what I would be getting for a travel tech, what's that? Subtract those numbers, do the math, do the research, and finding out where you would be on that scale, because it might be higher than what you're currently making. And that is something that you can use to your advantage at your current place of employment or a future place of employment of going, you know, what your, again, recognizing your value and knowing how to place your value on that scale.
Yeah, good points. And I'd like to add as well, the travel landscape is really impacting the shortage right now. And I think the definition of traveling maybe a couple of years ago was, hey, you know, I live in Maryland, I'm going to go to a lab in Texas. Well, now it's changed where people are traveling to work at the lab down the street, or even stay and work inside their own lab. So, you know, I've seen situations where people, you know, talk about leaving and they're like, well, what if we hired you as a travel tech? And, you know, assignments are 13 weeks traditionally, but, you know, some travelers stay for a year. You know, they'll with the right lab and the right shortage, they'll keep you there. So the med techs have a big leverage right now to go into that.
Ian, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I guess I'm the odd man out here. I have experience working with a traveler once in my career. They were great. And it was due to a critical need that we reached out to a company to employ us, give us a traveler to train. They did stay for longer than the 13 weeks, which was great. But towards the end of it, they're like, I can't wait to get another assignment, which, you know, more power to them. I will say a handful of my former coworkers did leave during the pandemic to become travelers. Now she's in one of the islands around Guam, I believe. And she's seeing the world. She was in Boston and she was in Arizona, San Diego. So she's doing these contracts and she's having the time of her life. And that's great. However, she's having to be retrained every single time and learn new workflows. And, you know, granted, she's the type of person that can understand how to do that at the drop of a dime. And it is a real unique skill set to be able to be a traveler and accommodate those needs.
I'm curious because I know, let's see, end of February, we're going to have a bunch of new grads hitting the ground pretty soon. And I'm curious if you have any advice for getting your very first job after graduation, other than use your clinical rotations as like a months-long job interview. But how do you actually get that foot in the door at your first job?
Follow up with HR, 1,000,000%. My wife is in HR, so I'm not going to say anything too strenuous, but it is very, very tedious with some hospitals, especially if they're a big organization, to make sure your resume is seen by the right person, especially with how digital things are nowadays. It gets filtered through however many algorithms, and it can really impact your foot getting into the door. However, if you follow up or even by chance figure out who a lab director is or anyone internally to reach out to and say, hey, HR should have my resume. I'm really interested in my position or in this position. Just wanted to give you my personal information. And if you need anything, let me know. That actually does a lot. We had someone call us from Boston and we ended up hiring them, but it was 9 months later that they were able to come to Colorado that they had everything ready for us to say, I will take my test on this day. I'm getting through X, Y, and Z right now. I understand if you can't hire me out the gate, that I will be in Denver in 9 months, and I would love to work for your hospital. And the timing all worked out, and he stayed true to his word, and he got in the door right away. And so that was great.
I was going to say, with the laboratory workforce shortages that we have in this country for trained MLSs, MLTs, if you're having a difficult time getting your foot through the door, give me a call, because something's happening there. Like, let's have a talk. Because, I mean, again, I know with some hospital organizations, trust me, I completely understand that some hospital organizations going through their HR can take some time and can be some issues. But as far as actually getting your foot in the door, that should not be an issue in today's current climate with the workforce. That should not be a concern to any new graduate right now.
Yeah. And one thing I'd like to add is, I think, yeah, you're spot on, Miles. But sometimes when there's roles, like if you're trying to get into supervisor role or say a technical specialist, it's like, how do I stand out if I'm just a lead, just a lead? You're qualified for the role, but to the untrained eye, they might not pick it up. So I think it's really important on resumes to put objective statements saying, currently looking to utilize my experience 9 years doing this to move into a supervisor role. Or a technical specialist role. I see a lot of great people get overlooked just because their resume isn't showing what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. I was going to mention that too, Shawn, as far as adjust the resume for the job that you're applying for each individual location. Go to their website, look up their mission value statement, go look up the job listing itself and pull from that job listing and put that in your resume. Because even if they are using a computer program, that's the words they're looking for in the computer program. They literally copy and paste that into the search engine of those resumes. If it's that large of an organization that they're doing that, that's where it comes from. So make sure that when you go through your resume, you have that on there. I know this is going to sound crazy as well, but being in the position I am and seeing the number of resumes I see on a daily basis, make sure your contact information is on there and make sure that other people check for errors and readability. Again, have a friend to look at it. I know resume writing is its own unique form of grammar, but have somebody else look at it and ensure that it makes sense.
As cute as they are, emojis on a resume don't do you any favors.
I make the joke that resumes are like fashion. There's some things that'll never go out of style. A pair of jeans will never go out of style, but then you're going to look and go, why the heck were we all wearing parachute pants? Some of these things that we see on resumes that are trendy for a few years and then they go away. Don't fall down that rabbit hole. Stick to the basics. Stick to the tried and true, the blue jeans and the t-shirt that have been around for decades. Don't try and be too fancy or trendy with it.
So I'm curious about most of us, I think, when we got into this field, assumed that it would be a lot of like in-person type stuff. But now, thanks COVID, there's a lot of like virtual job interviews, which maybe we didn't come in thinking that this was going to happen to us. So I'm curious if any of you have any strategies for handling that little monkey wrench being thrown at us.
I mean, I would just treat it as any other in-person interview. Still dress as if you're going to interview professionally. Still understand what you are speaking to. Be able, as Miles said earlier, those questions that everyone hates, be prepared to answer them. And honestly, still be yourself. Just because it's in front of a camera instead of in front of a person. They're still looking for you as the employee and looking to see what you can bring to the organization. So things like teamwork or familiarity with assays or instrumentation, that all works to your benefit, whether it's in person or in front of a computer screen.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing with virtual interviews too is, a lot of organizations, they're like, hey, we just do, one virtual interview and then we'll make an offer. Be wary. I mean, that's a good thing, but as a medical lab scientist, make sure to get that tour. Say like, hey, I'd love to accept pending me coming in and seeing the lab and meeting everyone. Because I've seen a couple situations where they accept virtually and they get in there and they're like, what did I just get myself into? So make sure you get a tour.
Absolutely. The other thing I was going to mention with the online, like Zoom call interviews and stuff, is just like with the other interviews, practice, set up a Zoom interview with a friend and check that there's any lag on your call. So that way, that you need to pause between speaking so you're not accidentally interrupting somebody. Make sure that your sound levels are good, that, like practicing, because again, this is something I see a lot in a Zoom interview, is like right now, I'm reading the names on the screen, but I don't look like I'm looking at anybody there. Look at the camera, make eye contact with the camera, because it makes sure that the interviewers know that you're making eye contact with them. Eye contact is a very strong indicator in an interview that we would do in person, but on Zoom and these online calls, we tend to get distracted by other things. So make
it
sure.
It feels weird to look at the camera and not like at your face.
I know. That's why we have to practice.
And so I would love to address the dreaded negotiation. How do you answer that question? So what are you looking to make? Or what is your desired salary range? There's the whole never be the first person to answer it. But like, what do you do?
So is this in person? Because if it's just via the application, you can always be willing to negotiate as a response if they allow free text answer. And then, you don't want to be outlandish, but again, to Miles' point earlier, research, see what the other places are making, see what the experience you have would yield in terms of pricing. And then honestly, there's a couple rule of thumbs that say, ask high, negotiate low, but don't be outlandish. The value you're bringing to the team, and it is uncomfortable. The worst thing they can do at the end of the day is say no, or counter offer you with something else. Don't be discouraged by it. You can counter a counter. There are ways to play the game, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure you're realistic and willing to understand that, it's a whole package, usually with benefits and everything, in terms of negotiating a salary, as opposed to just, having a dollar amount in front of you.
Yeah, that's good advice. And then one thing I would add too, I know Samantha just said in the chat, it can be easy to freeze up or get intimidated. It definitely is. But I always try to remind people, as long as your negotiation is within reason, I respect people when they ask for more, because it shows how much they care about what they're worth. But treat it like a game. Treat it like a game. There's nothing you can really do to insult someone or make them mad, as long as it's within reason. But try not to throw out a number first. Just ask them, hey, what is the pay range, for this role? What would I be qualified for? And then typically wait to make counters till you get to the offer stage. So if you interviewed well, you can use that as leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. I do tell people that when I've given talks before, avoid giving a range when you're discussing a salary negotiation. Make sure that you have an exact number, because if you give a range, guess which number in that range they're going to go for. So I would always say, like, I'm just throwing out a number here for silliness, whatever, is I would say, I have to make my ends meet in order to take this job. I need to make X number of dollars an hour, whether it's $30 an hour, whatever it is, whatever that number is, and have your reasons why. If they go, hey, that seems like a little bit high, why are you asking this range, what have you? Be prepared to back that up with, well, with that salary range in our location, this would be my tax rate. This would be my net take home rate. This is my bills would be 30% of this would be for my rent. You don't have to give exact numbers for that stuff, but being able to explain, this is the reason why you're asking for that number.
So once you have your interview and you think you knock it out of the park, what happens if they don't get back to you?
So one of the things you can always do, and Andrea made a point of it in the chat, is send a thank you, send a follow-up. Say, hey, I really enjoyed us talking. Just wanted to let you know, still really interested. Had a great time, touring the lab, and think I, really enjoy working here. Please, as always, let me know if you need anything. It is in your full right to follow up. And I've had terrible experiences with HR and phenomenal experience with HR. Same with lab directors. Everyone's crazy busy. And sometimes they just need that little reminder back to like, oh yeah, I meant to reach out to this person. And sometimes that's all it takes.
Well, and it's also really helpful that if you remember while you're in the interview itself, to ask the supervisor that you're having the interview with, is there a direct contact for you that in a timeline in which you would like me to contact you if I haven't heard from you? There's nothing wrong with asking that question, because again, sometimes things do get held up in HR departments or in other areas. And so if you can send an email directly to that supervisor, then they can proceed to go from there. Don't call them, email, always email. always, 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 always email. Don't ever call a lab supervisor about a job opening. Always use email for that. But I would do the same thing. And honestly, if they don't get back to you after that, then is that really a company you want to work for?
Good point. I was going to say, and for my company, we do feedback within an hour. Like, it's like, if you're taking more than a day or two, that lab is going to lose out on a lot of people, because it's like the housing market right now. People will go so fast.
Yeah.
I like Andrea posted a good question in the chat about activities you should be doing to sort of build your resume so you're ready when the opportunity for advancement comes, whether it's inside or outside the healthcare system where you're working.
Volunteer, take on projects. Even if you're working an off shift, say, hey, I volunteer to stay an extra hour to learn how this new analyzer works. If you want to store some specimens, I'll make sure to run them, by the end of my shift week or whatever. Feel free to read through the SOPs and make notations and just say, hey, I understand this was written however many years ago or is being worked on now for revision based off of workflow. I think that this would be a really great addition to that. Any of the little side hustles you can do internally are always beneficial. Inventory, putting away and being able to voluntarily say, hey, I looked at the shelves and realized X, Y, and Z is getting short. Is this being ordered? Just be aware of what's going on in the lab and try and be in the know.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I'm going to sound like the paid spokesperson here, but organizations like ASCLS, that is literally how I got the position I'm in now. Was one of the people within my organization saw me give an ASCLS presentation that I gave at a national meeting, and they were like, this is who we need in this position. I've definitely used the experience that I've had with ASCLS and other organizations to put on my resume to help with my promotion in my career. So that's certainly something that you can do to help build your resume and participate and still have experiences that would look good for advancement if you don't have the opportunity necessarily at your current workplace to do some of the things that Ian mentioned, although completely agree with him, do those things. But if for some reason you don't have that opportunity, participating in things like this.
Shawn, anything to add?
No, they pretty much covered what I was going to say there.
All right, cool. So Miles, we talked a little bit about questions that you might get during a job interview. I would be curious if the three of you might want to elaborate on questions that you've seen being pretty popular and strategies for how to answer them, because I always feel like I get the, what's your biggest weakness? And like perfectionist is just not an answer. So
Well, like I said before, like that question, what's your biggest weakness? What they're really looking for is what area of that job are they going to need to spend the most amount of time either training or developing you to be at the level that they want. I know a lot of other questions. I mean, essentially the point of the interview is getting to know you. So understand that all of these questions, no matter how they're worded, they're going to ask you, you know, can you tell me a time that you were stressed? Or can you tell me a time that something was questioned about you? Or can you tell me, you know, a time that you were faced with something challenging? The actual story itself, they don't care who it was in the lab. They don't care what the actual situation was. What they're looking for is you. How did you handle that? How did you respond? How did you react? What was your responsibility? How were you accountable? And that's what these questions are going to be. They're looking for you. So I tell people, don't get too wrapped up in the situation. There's, I'm sure Shawn is familiar with this, of the STAR method of answering questions. It's situation, task, action, I forget what the R is, but it's basically results. Yes.
My husband was just interviewing and he has it on a Post-it note on his computer monitor so that he can hit those every question.
And one of the things I can say is don't focus on that first letter as much. Focus on the A and the R more than the S and the T in that. Talk about your actions, because that's what we're actually listening for and want to know. The other thing I would make very clear in an interview is if you are looking to move up in the organization, are you looking for self-improvement while you're there? Are they going to support you if you decide to go back to school, or if you decide you want time off to raise a family, or you decide what have you? You know, you don't have to give away any information, of course, that is outside the realm of what's allowable in an interview, but we're wanting to know, hey, is this somebody who we want to develop into management? And if that's something that you're interested in, speak up in that first interview. Absolutely. Let them know what your plans are, because to be perfectly honest, that's one of the things that I will see is it tells me that you would have longevity in my organization. That's what it's telling me, is that if you're willing to go back to school while you're working with me, if you're willing to move up into management, that means I'm going to get that much longer of you working with me.
I 100% back everything you just said, Miles. You know, every organization has those mandatory roll your eye questions. But again, going back to what we talked about earlier, learn the organization's mission, see how you can incorporate those little buzzwords into your responses, especially if, you know, the lab has, you know, or the hospital has pillars or anything like that, that really support what you could bring to the table. And, you know, with new hires, like people understand, or should be understandable, that you are new. So, you know, I guess I like to have fun on the few interviews that I've been able to participate in lately. I just ask them like, oh, you had this analyzer. Did you ever have this troubleshooting experience, and how did you handle it? You know, did they wash their hands of it and just go, oh, I just talked to the person running the analyzer and I just let them take care of it? Or did they say, oh yeah, you know, they called service and the entire time I was watching, I'm asking questions, really trying to get involved to understand how to find a resolution to whatever was going on. You know, those types of things really bring value to that interview, because you realize that they're not passive, they're active and engaged in, you know, figuring out what problems are actually happening in the lab, because they happen frequently. We all know that. And so I tend to really get impressed with those types of responses when I can see that they're proactive in finding solutions to those types of situations.
I'll also add on really quick too. I always try and stress with people, an interview, if it's a good interview, again, it's a conversation. So like if you were sitting down and having that interview with Ian and Ian said, hey, did you have this issue with this analyzer? And you said, even if you never did, then ask them the question back. What did you do in that situation? I would like to know. You know, make sure that you always have questions to ask them back. Ask the person who's interviewing you, why do you like working here? You know, what do you enjoy about your job? I always make sure you have like 5 or 6 really good questions to ask the people who are interviewing you, to go, you know, what's a typical day in this job look like for you? What's the most stressful situation you've been in? Why do you enjoy working here? You know, how did you get your position? You know, those kind of things. And the last thing is, I always, before I enter, one of the best things at the end of an interview is go, I know you're limited on time, but is there anything I can address with you before I leave today? Is there anything that you have questions about me that you weren't able to, that you didn't think we were going to have time to ask? Is there anything follow-up? Is there anything that gave you concern about me that I can address now before I walk out of that room? Because that is the thing. Once you walk out of that room, that interview is over. So you want to make sure you've addressed everything. And if there is a spot where you got tongue-tied or a little bit nervous or whatever, that's your go back. Don't be afraid to go, hey, can we go back and address this? Because that shows that you recognized it and you're addressing it and taking that challenge head on and having that conversation.
I'm curious. I know at my job recently, we had our, annual reviews where our manager emailed us in advance and had us set our, goals and made sure that we were meeting them and things of that nature. And I always feel not quite incompetent, but like less than good at setting those sorts of goals for advancement opportunities. So if you have anything to talk about as far as that goes, that would be great.
My biggest thing in terms of that, because I'm actually in the process of doing that with my team right now, make sure the goals you set are attainable and realistic and are serious. Saying you're going to bring treats on holidays for all of your staff may or may not be, the greatest thing. While it might be possible, may not be the most realistic thing in terms of growth. Saying that you want to, attend CE events, or, that an analyzer is coming through and you want to participate. And again, I keep going back and forth, but with validation or whatever, that's the type of stuff that is attainable, benefits the lab, gets you recognized, and shows us that you want to participate.
And to add to that, make them measurable. So, not just, hey, I want to improve my turnaround time. I would like to improve my turnaround time by 5%, 10%, and make sure that it's something that you can pull and make it measurable.
Shawn, do you agree?
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. It's I always kind of tell lab directors and managers, like, make sure you're developing your people, because development is different for everyone. Some people just want to stay consistent working the bench, while some are like, hey, I really want to get into QA. So if those labs are going to invest that time into you, it's more likely for you to stay when you feel valued, and they're not going to leave maybe over a couple bucks. So yeah, having that plan for advancement is really good.
For those people who are maybe getting the first, real job they've ever had, I know that the benefits and kind of, more than just this is the amount of money you'll be making per hour, it can kind of get overwhelming. Would any of you feel good talking about that sort of stuff? And just how to wrap your head around it when you get that job offer?
Like the total compensation package, including benefits and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Miles, I feel like you'd be an expert for this one.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm just going to call a spade a spade. A good place of employment would help you with that, because they would, in that offer letter that they send you, they would spell out, this is your hourly, this is how your benefits are. You would be able to take the time, because take your time when you get your offer letter. Don't feel obligated that you have to give an answer like in 2 seconds. Take your time with that offer letter, go home, look up what insurance costs, what this is. A good offer letter would give you some guidelines to that, though. They would let you know if there's a bonus structure, if there's the 401k options, what all of that is. A good offer letter would have that information in there to help you wrap your mind around it. Now, as far as the taxes and all that stuff, you're on your own with that, but that's something you can easily go to the IRS calculator, go to anything and put in for your state. And we all live in the US right now here, so we're good. But you can put those numbers in and you can see an average of what your net would be every year, every 2 weeks, what have you. You can put that information in and find out what tax bracket that would put you in for your location. So that's something that you can take and use and help yourself wrapping your mind around, okay, if I'm making X number of dollars an hour, what am I actually taking home?
The only thing I would add to that is the things that are meaningful to you, keep an eye out for. What is their PTO structure? Do they allot you X amount of hours per pay period? If so, does that increase or decrease? Or hopefully never decrease, but increase over time? Or is it a chunk of change right at the beginning and you have X amount allotted to you and you chip away at that PTO block every 6 months? Some companies are very unique. Some have stock options. Some have education perks where they'll pay your tuition for X amount of credits. So things that are important to you personally, also keep an eye out for those in regards to whether or not you want to accept an offer based off of the benefits package.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and the final thing I will say is don't fall for the shift differential line. Shift differential is not your salary. Do not let anybody tell you. If you put in and say, my bottom line is I need to make $30 an hour, don't let them tell you, oh, well, you'll make $30 an hour with shift differential or weekend differential. No. That's not, don't fall for that. That's compensation for you for losing your time and the valuable times of the day and valuable times of the week. Don't let them pressure you into taking that as part of your base salary. Because again, then what if you decide, what if something happens and you move into another shift, or you change schedules, or your boss needs you to change schedules or days of the week? Don't let them pull you into that, because I've seen it a lot of times.
I see Andrea has posted a couple of things in the chat that I did not do with my current job, where she's saying that during the interview, ask the things that might not be in your offer letter. So how many holidays are you going to have to work? How many weekends are you going to have to work? You're going to be expected to work overtime. Are you going to have to pay for parking? And if not, like, where is the free parking? And is that a mile away from the hospital and there's a shuttle, or how will it affect your commute? So it's all of these questions that we just don't even think about. I'm curious if you would have any other things that are sort of the things that you might not think to have to ask about, because paying for parking, I did not ask about that where I work. And as it turns out, I have to.
Uniform. Are uniforms provided? Is it a specific color scrubs? Is it business casual? Whatever that is, make sure you find out what you're going to be wearing.
And who pays for it?
Yeah. Who pays for it? Again, a lot of that can be considered tax deductible depending on if you reach the threshold limits annually, which now it's practically impossible unless you are self-employed. So that's still something to look into, though. I know a lot of places where they do have a uniform, they'll have like scrub fairs or give coupons or something like that you can get discounts on, stuff like that. But again, like the other gentlemen were mentioning before, you got to figure out what's important to you when you're looking at this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just because I had a laugh at this. Also ask about embroidery for the scrubs. I got the scrubs that were the right color, thought I was good to go. And they were like, you don't have the logo embroidered. And I was like, no, I didn't know that was a thing.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You're wearing a lab coat.
So, every place has their perks, I guess. But I had to get a whole new coupon to get my scrubs embroidered.
Oh,
yeah, just out of experience.
It blows my mind hearing people talk about paying for parking. That floors me.
Oh, I pay to park.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I would love to know if the three of you have any other final advice before I wrap it up here.
My only point of advice would be if you do have the chance to meet physically, go to the lab, or even have a one-on-one with someone currently working the bench, talk to them. Ask them how they feel about the team. Ask them if they enjoy working there. Ask them what their stressors are. Ask them if they have analyzed like what their uptime is. Because most of the time they're very honest with you. They have no reason to hold back a lot of the time. So, just be really upfront with your questions and ask about the team dynamic. How many people do they work with at any one shift? That could be something that surprises a lot of people, especially working an off shift. And yeah, that would be my big recommendation.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of my final piece of advice would be, we talked about it, but the negotiation part, right? Negotiation is typically, one counter is really it. There's really not a lot of back and forth, but you have so much leverage, as a medical laboratory scientist. So make the ask, because nothing bad can really come from it. So yeah, that's what I got.
My last couple bits of information is don't forget that the laboratory world is a very small world, like almost inbred. We make the joke. There's the joke about 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. Well, in the lab world, it's 3 degrees of separation from every other person. Just looking at the people on this call, I know somebody who knows them. So remember that when you're doing your interview and whenever you're talking about your experience, make sure you don't talk trash about somebody you did clinicals with or a previous supervisor, because you really never know. And then the last thing is just remembering that the greatest power you have is the power to say no and walk away, and make sure that if you're in that situation, don't be afraid to tell them that. You need to be able to tell whoever is, if you're not happy with the offer, no, I'm not happy with the offer, and this is why. Because you can't expect them to change it and for other places to change if they don't know why you're not taking the position.
I really love all of those things. I want to thank all of you very, very much for coming and being on the panel. I'd love to thank everyone who attended and who asked questions. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And I see some thank yous appearing in the chat. So it is very much appreciated, your time that you put into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having